Welcome to another WED Web Chat. I'm Kanan Chandran, the publisher of StormAsia.com, and this is our regular series of webinars on all sorts of topics. And today is it a good time to launch a startup? Okay, I think what's been going on in the world has been quite troubling for many. Many jobs are being lost. Many people are left wondering what they're going to do. Recently, must have read Accenture acts 11,000 jobs worldwide for the AI-driven future that they are pursuing. And then, of course, governments are also getting a bit antsy about foreigners working. So where you would have found opportunity elsewhere, now you might be challenged. For instance, USA has slapped on a $100,000 application fee for the H-1B visa, which allows companies to hire foreign skilled workers for specialized occupations. So there are these sort of things going around. New blocks, of course, are forming. Then you have challenges within that of trying to communicate with each other, trying to understand culture, trying to navigate distances, and other administrative issues that may crop up. If you're stuck in a situation where you've got nothing to do, then necessity and invention might come together, and you might start thinking of things that you want to do on your own to try and figure out what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So now, is this a fertile time for startups? I think at its point of origin, anything is a startup, right? So regardless of the circumstances, there will always be startups popping up all over the place. Now, our startups, some have said it's like a rocket. It's fueled by big ideas, but strapped together with just tape. But it's aiming for the stars. And a lot of that journey will come to fruition if you get the right support. Now, how do we get that support? So let's ask our panelists for their views on the startup scene. And we've got Joel Chang, who is the group CEO of Charged Asia, an electric motorcycle developer and manufactures, distributes direct to users and exports their own branded cloud-connected fleets that are competitive, affordable, and practical compared to traditional combustion motorcycles. Okay, it was launched in 2023 in Jakarta, and it's a very environmentally friendly and sustainable business, which Joel has started. This is one of, I think, 20 things that he has started up. So it's good to have Joel to share his experiences as we go along in today's discussion. We've also got Julien Salanave. He's a serial entrepreneur and a venture capitalist with a career spanning 3 continents. He's been in Asia, in Europe, and North America. And after founding and investing in multiple startups, he has chosen to dedicate his time to education and grooming the next generation of entrepreneurial leaders. Now, he's currently the professor of practice in entrepreneurship and innovation at ESSEC Business School, where he's a director of the top-ranked ESSEC Mannheim Executive MBA APAC program. And he's also director of ESSEC Ventures APAC. So it's great to have Julien and to get his perspective on the topic for the day. And we have P. Jayaratnam, who's the executive director of S&J Asia Pacific Ventures. Now, Jaya is actively involved in the VC space and private equity markets globally. He's an angel investor in the startup arena and through representations on 2 US VCs. And he's also an active board member of SMART, which is an MIT initiative in Singapore. So welcome, gentlemen, to today's discussion. Can I just first maybe start off with you, Jaya, and what was your first startup and how did you get into it?
Well, I got involved in startups in my career with multinationals and got involved in setting up many of the MNC operations for Electrolux in the region, and I did the first industrial divisions for that company. And my first major project was Changi Airport. It was a multi-million-dollar project. I became their first president in India, and I worked for them in Germany and in Sweden as well. So that kind of start in the more traditional areas. Then I got more involved in the startup space after giving up on corporate life. I had been there, done that. I had enough of corporate life. So I wanted to venture out on my own, but paid a heavy price on the learning curve, because as you know, 80 to 90% of these startups go south, and you hope that the 10 or 20% that make it cover those losses and put you in a positive situation. That was not the case when I first started out, but it's improved over time.
Okay, so was it like almost like by default that you wound up in startup?
Yes, it was. I was thinking what to do after I left corporate life, and this was a very active space. And in Singapore, there's so many opportunities for you to upgrade yourself or get involved through the various associations that you belong with. And it was a natural gravity for me to go over to this space because it was the most happening space, a lot of activity, and a lot of what shall I say, convergence of opportunities.
Okay. So at that time, corporates were still big, right? Corporates were still flavor of the moment. People were wanting to join corporations and organizations. Is that a fair assumption to make?
It was at that time, yes. But it was beginning to wane because many of them were beginning to move out. And that trend has continued much more now. Many of more traditional companies, the MNCs, are preferring to move to Bangkok or Malaysia or Vietnam, Indonesia, because of market size and cost of operations. So that it is not anymore like when I joined the workforce, when the obvious place was to go to multinationals. Now the startup scene has become a default opportunity for many young people.
Okay, great. Julien, having been in the space and talking to the younger generation, forming their own startups, do you agree with what Jaya just said? And what's been your sort of experience grooming the next generation?
Yeah, definitely. The rise of entrepreneurship as an alternative career path to multinationals is something that I've been seeing for the past few years. I mean, I've only been in education for 7 years now, but I clearly saw this emergence. We have an increasing number of students who are considering entrepreneurship as an alternative path. And this was way before the AI emergence, which has certainly accelerated the movement in two ways. We call there's an opportunity-driven entrepreneurship. People see AI or other technology disruptions as an opportunity to create new businesses, disrupt existing industries. And as you mentioned in your introduction, there's the necessity-driven entrepreneurship, people being laid off or cannot find their first job and decided to enter entrepreneurship because they can't find a job. So I think, especially in Singapore, the majority of students and executive education participants that I see tend to be pursuing more of the opportunity-driven entrepreneurship. They have alternative job path. They are intentionally entering the field. They see AI especially as a wonderful accelerator for multiple new business opportunities. But it's true that there's also an increasing number of people that are seeing this more through the necessity lens. Can I find an alternative to the traditional job, basically?
Okay. Is there a sort of certain age band that you see being more active in the startup space? Or is it free game? Anybody just jump in?
It's totally free game. So of course, the types of opportunities and the way people approach those opportunities differ depending on their work experience. people that have already had an established experience in an industry, and that then tend to pursue opportunity entrepreneurship. So are looking for high growth, high potential opportunities, tend to capitalize on their industry knowledge, on their contacts, what we call their social network of contacts, whereas younger crowd have less of those things by definition, so they will approach the opportunity slightly differently. But there's no real age criteria on what we know, which may be counterintuitive to the common perception, is that when we look at success in entrepreneurship, maybe counterintuitively, the best performing founders tend to create their company in the 40 to 45-year-old age group. So of course, we always think about those very young college dropouts that go and build the next unicorns, but those are the outliers. If we look at across broad samples of industries, you have a higher chance of overcoming the very low odds of success in startups if you tend to start your company slightly later in life with expertise, knowledge, contacts that make your idea a bit more strong to begin with.
Okay, thanks, Julien. Joel, having just heard Julien's take on it, you jumped in pretty young, right? Pretty early. What do you think? Expertise, experience important, or just drive and determination? What worked for you?
Yeah, I started my entrepreneurship journey when I was in university almost 30 years ago, right? I wasn't interested in school. I was always a petrolhead. I wanted to pay for my hobby, which was I love cars, right? So what I did, I went to set up a car parts trading. I went to approach a dealership and said, can I set up a table here? I'll help you sell parts to your customers. I'll split the profits with you. So as you can see, obviously my grades suffered. It wasn't really focused on that too much, right? But yeah, I actually echo what Julien is saying, and it's been a rocky path for me the last 30 years, set up more than 20 startups, got some good exits, some are still really going good, a lot of failures as well. And I think the key to what Julien is saying, I fully agree it's about this maturity, not just about the maturity of the person, like in the mindset, but also this experience, right? So you imagine, right? When you launch a startup, it's just you and maybe a co-founder or two. And you're essentially the engineer, the accountant, the legal advisor, the corporate secretary, the strategist, the entire C-suite is just maybe you or another person, right? So you're multidisciplinary. Now, if you don't have the experience working in companies or in other startups over a certain period of time, right? We talked about it's well proven that to be a master in anything, you need roughly about 10 years, right? Whether it's in badminton or in, being an accountant or what have you, right? You need roughly about 10 years experience. Maybe some people are faster or slow, but there is no replacement for that real time and effort put into setting up a business, running a business, going through all the problems, right, that you have, raising capital, finding your first customer, getting a loan from a bank, So I think it is true. You need to have a certain set of maturity. Now, I see children today, they're maturing early, which is a great thing. So I think for our time, maybe because we don't have technology and all that sort of stuff or the leg up, right? We just rely on our parents or schoolmates. But I think now with technology and networks, I think with AI, I think the next generation, that they can reach that maturity earlier. So I hope to see more successful startup founders in their 30s.
All of you who have seen what's taking place in the startup space, you've been through the startup space as well. Do you see things unfolding differently today in the startup ecosystem as opposed to the past?
Very, very, very differently. If you take the universities, they are promoting entrepreneurship and the startup culture, especially in the business administration, engineering faculties. And they've had some very good professors who have got commercial industry experience leading them. And they've been brought in for that purpose. And they've had to pay them relatively well to attract them and keep them. So that's made a huge difference. And speaking about the age factor, these younger people are getting much more involved. But at the same time, because of my involvement with MIT Smart, and there we get a lot of assistant professors and professors applying for grants for research projects. And over the 15 years that I've been on the board, the quality of applications and the caliber of submissions has really gone up. The Singapore government brought it in to get an ecosystem. In the case of MIT in the US, it grew naturally between academia, entrepreneurship, and the venture community. But in Singapore, we poured money into it, and it seems to be working. Maybe not as well, but it is definitely working, and we're creating a culture. Also, the universities are pushing it strongly because their ratings and rankings are affected by it, research and these kind of outcomes, right? So that's very much in their interest. And so you get a whole cohort of people of different age groups coming into it. And as the other two speakers said, the experience factor comes in, and sometimes you get older people coming in as mentors to help the young people with the bright ideas.
Okay. Joel, do you echo what Jaya just said, or do you see things slightly differently? You're based in Indonesia most of the time now?
Yes, I'm based in Jakarta, and as you know, almost 300 million people, a lot of them still very young. I totally echo what Jaya is saying. Now there's a support network, like there are mentors, there are grants. Mostly, even every country, even in Indonesia, you have grants for young startup founders. In the past, right, when I was, trying to set up my own company, what, 18, 19, 20 years old, you just had to borrow money from your parents, right? All your friends have no money as well, right? No such thing as what's a startup, right? It's just you want to set up a company, right? So you've got to go beg somebody to and they know you're going to fail, right? It's more like oh, really? Well, let me do you a favor. What you can do for me? Drive me around for a month, right? Then I'll lend you like $2,000, that kind of thing, right? So, but now it's totally different. Now I see, I see this fantastic ecosystem that's available to young people today. There's so many programs around the world in universities everywhere. And I think the key thing is because most of even the developing world now is successful. We're successful communities. We have these comfort foundations where our young can then explore. They don't really worry about, oh, I need to become a scholar because I need to put food on the table, that kind of thing, because I don't know how long my sole breadwinner father can continue, that kind of thing, with my 3 or 4 children, brothers and sisters in the family, that sort of thing, right? So I think it's a really good thing for us. And I not just, like I said, I don't just see it in Singapore, I see it in the rest of Southeast Asia as well, and especially in China. I've been based in China for 10 years, and in China, they want to be the Bill Gates of tomorrow. They want to be the Elon Musk of tomorrow, right? And there's literally 100 million of these young people out there striving for that thing.
Okay. Julien, you must be dealing with students from all over the place, right? So do you sense a difference in their approach based on where they come from, or is there a consistent mindset in play?
I think for sure, entrepreneurship has become extremely mainstream now, and so it's a commonly shared aspiration across cultures and regardless of the background. I think that the paradox that I see, and we talk often about with students, is that it's never been easier to start a business. I mean, the cost of starting a business, the tools to start a business are now widely accessible. The investment that is needed in order to just get started is much lower than ever. So the barriers to entry into entrepreneurship have never been as low as today. But the paradox is that the barrier to success, the bar to success, has never been higher, because now you don't just compete locally against a few other entrepreneurs, you're competing with teenagers coding from their bedroom in the other side of the world. So that's the paradox that the younger generation especially faces. They see the opportunities, they see that it's more commonly accepted to start, that their parents are not going to blame them for choosing entrepreneurship over a traditional corporate career, but they also understand that the playing field is just much more competitive. So it's you need to be extremely self-driven and competitive to decide to enter this game early on, because they are not naive about the fact that this is not going to be easy. They may aspire to become the next Elon Musk, but they also understand that the path to get there is going to be extremely hard and extremely competitive. So that's the paradox that they're wrestling with.
Yeah, it's certainly quite a different environment. And you were talking earlier about grants. I'm just wondering, though, access to that kind of money is easier now. And does that sort of curb that raw drive and power that sometimes pushes you to create something spectacular? Because you have easier access to the funds now, you may not push yourself as hard, because otherwise you don't get anything, right? So you really need to make it fantastic. Do you think that is a part of an obstacle, because governments too want to get in on the action?
Happy to have a first shot at this. So what I see for grants is that, so they exist, in multiple countries, but they tend to be allocated to very specific types of projects in most countries. So they will prioritize projects that have either intellectual property components. So JR was mentioning trying to spin off technology from university labs and try to make them into full-fledged ventures. So I see in many countries that those grants tend to be prioritized towards what we also commonly call deep tech projects, where there's required for significant upfront R&D investments to get the project off the ground. But most projects that are being started by people, be it younger or older people, are rarely fall into those categories. So in other words, they are rarely grant compatible or flagged by the grant program. So today, more than ever, the vast majority of projects being launched are not funded by grants, are bootstrapped for the most part. We talk a lot about venture capital as kind of the holy grail of funding for successful startups. But when you look at the numbers, VC money is only allocated to a very, very small minority of projects also. So the vast majority of projects being started tend to be funded the good old way, bootstrapped, and then customer financing, which I always like to remind my students that it's the cheapest form of financing out there. Getting revenues from customers, you get validation, plus you get money, which is 2 in 1, and therefore I don't think the grant game is really skewing or changing the incentives. I mean, you may have the occasional grant chaser, but I think for the most part, most of the ventures are not really playing that game.
Joel and JR, are grants something that help or hinder? What do you feel?
Definitely create an ecosystem that facilitates. And in the case of MIT Smart, we have over the last decade received over $10 billion from the government in research labs and funding. We give $50,000 for a startup concept and $250,000 for them to become commercial as a second grant, depending on which one they qualify for. But interestingly, we make every applicant go through a boot camp, because we find that many an engineer or an academic is quite naive about the business world, and they don't understand what's out there. They think they make a product and the world will be the path to their doorstep and beg for it. That is not the reality. So we give them a sense of reality and a heavy dose of what's practical and what can work, and guide them along on that score. And if the portfolio companies run into trouble, we are able to step in and help them resolve the problems, and eventually maybe change the CEO and get someone more appropriate to run that particular startup. And I think that's quite key to the success of the programs. And, you know, in the universities itself, you have like in NUS, Innovate, and so on, that helps with guidance and funding. And you have Block 71 that's come up, and a lot of incubators that help nurture these people go on to come up. But one issue I find is that many of the people who man VCs and so on have got into it off late. And having worked with US VCs, I find that their knowledge level is of a much higher magnitude compared to our guys. They are able to sense better and take better risks. Our guys are still very risk averse, and they follow the crowd more than go into pioneering areas that much.
I see grants in two ways, right? The first way is de-risking. It's very important to de-risk. Whether you're a young person, you know, your grant helps you take that extra risk. You're rather go for a cushy job, you know, because it's not investment. Like say borrow money or use it in savings, that kind of thing. Right? It helps you de-risk your idea, but it's also part of the learning process. So to me, grants for young people or new startup founders is kind of like an education, right? It's like paying for the education. Yes, a high chance of failure, but actually you're nurturing the next generation entrepreneurs. Then when you talk about companies as well, maybe more mature companies that go for grants for like innovative technologies, I think across the spectrum, there's a lot of value to be made. But what I do want to say is that I think grants have to be matched with outcomes, key value outcomes that are not decided definitely by the startup, okay, but are decided even not by the government or the educational institution that's giving the grant. But I believe that the outcomes should be decided, and then hence the grant approval should be decided by industry expert or industry, not just expert, a company. For example, right, let's say I got a fantastic food idea. Okay, I want to apply a food grant from SFA or something like that, right? The approval should be coming from a real food industry company in Singapore, let's say, wherever it is. They say, yes, that's something interesting. If that works, I will be willing to take up that solution. I'm willing to take it to the next level, invest in that founder, right? So what we don't want is people are thinking of bright ideas, but with no real commercial applicability. And so to me, the outcomes are really, really important. And it helps everybody in the ecosystem. It helps the startup founder direct themselves as well, direct to a certain focus, right? You know, in any space, it's so many things you can work on. Even let's say Jones, it's massive. There's 1,000 things you could go down a rabbit hole. But what is it that's going to bring true value? What's the highest chance of success? That's the key thing.
Okay, I suppose that part answers the question that came up. Do you rate selling skills as an important skill for startups in addition to their brilliant products, service, or ideas? I guess, you know, if you have something, you still need to know how to sell it, right? So I think that's quite critical. Do we have that ability to sell well in this younger generation of entrepreneurs that are venturing into the startup space?
Let me take a slightly different angle on the question, because first in the question, there's the premise that you need to have a brilliant idea to begin with. And that's one thing that I always challenge aspiring entrepreneurs to really think about, because they have this conception that, oh, in order to get started, I need to have a great idea, and I need money, and I need a great co-founder. And I try to challenge them on those ideas, because if you look at, those are of course nice to have, but number one, you don't really know if you have a great idea until the market adopts that idea. But tell them really what you absolutely need to begin with is identify a problem to solve, especially for first-time entrepreneurs. Startups do not have the luxury of educating the market to a solution that they don't need to begin with. So your job as an aspiring founder is to identify a problem to solve. And how this connects back to selling is interesting, because when you're in this problem discovery phase, you need to listen to the market. You need to go and observe the market. If you're too good of a seller, if you're too pushy, if you're not really discovering what are the underlying needs of the market you're pursuing. So there's a bit of this tension here, where of course you need to be comfortable going and engaging with people. That's very important. But if you're the absolute best seller, think Wolf of Wall Street type of sales guy, you're not listening. You're not listening to the market needs. You're not collecting those underlying problems. So, of course, once you have found a problem that you decide to pursue and you build a solution to that problem, the ability to sell is crucial and essential. But at the very, very beginning, listening to user needs, to understand them before trying to convince them that whatever your idea is doing is the best thing that they need. I think that's an important trade-off to keep in mind.
So it sounds as if you need to find solutions to existing problems as opposed to trying to create something that is brand new.
That's I always say, especially for first-time entrepreneurs, no matter what age you're pursuing, the safest path, and from my point of view, is to go for this route. Because if you come up with a solution and then you go out and look for a problem that this solution could solve, this is the pitfall for many, many, many startups. So for me, a market opportunity really begins with spotting a problem out there that you then try to solve.
Just moving this in a slightly different direction, are there markets that are better suited or more receptive to people with a startup idea, with a startup in mind? Do they work better in certain places as opposed to others? Is that an experience that you've encountered, Jaya?
In the Singapore context, our base market is rather small. So, the prospects of becoming a big company here are quite limited. But they have to look at the region to grow, and then globally. But what's very interesting is that the Singapore market is above or ahead of the curve and innovative, that new ideas take root here faster than in the region. And the region recognizes that if it's adopted in Singapore, the technology must be valid and good. It's not because your father is somebody or you've paid off somebody and bribed and got the project. So that helps it roll out in the region. And as for other countries, I find that the ecosystem, for instance, in India and China is just tremendous. The numbers involved, the talent base is really outstanding, and they are producing unicorns more than most places now, simply because of the talent base. And I'm really impressed with them. And they come from sometimes small towns and they think globally, as opposed to Japan, which I was in recently, and noticed that they're very inward looking. They don't look at it globally. And the funders also are quite happy to work on the local market. And as Joel mentioned, Indonesia, many people forget that there are 300 million people there. So it's a fantastic ecosystem and base to work on. We are so much stuck in an old mindset on that score. But I also find that working with the young people in China, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, they may come from extremely wealthy families, but they still have a lot of drive in the belly. I find that some of our guys are getting a bit soft, and that drive is somewhat missing. And that's very, very important, to believe in the technology and be devoted to it day and night, 24/7, to make it happen. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Joel, do you see that as an advantage since you're based in Jakarta?
In my experience, I think that's one of the key pillars. You need to choose your market very wisely. I always tell people in the automotive segment, I've been in automotive for 20 years. There is no Volkswagen without Germany. There is no Toyota, Honda without Japan. Okay, and there's no Tesla without the US and China. You cannot build a car company out of Singapore. You can build a bank and a really powerful fintech company, and even AI out of Singapore, but you cannot build agri-tech out of Singapore. It's impossible, right? You can build agri-tech out of India, out of Indonesia, but by the same virtue, right, it's really difficult to build AI out of Indonesia. You need data centers, you need compute, that sort of thing, right? So you have to choose your market very, very wisely, because it's your talent pool, it's your resources, right? It's your customer base. So that's the most important thing. To me, sales is the most important thing. Having done startups for almost 30 years, right? Why? You constantly And I take Julian's point, right? That, and let me just add to Julian's point that what Julian is saying is that if you are trying too hard to sell, you're not selling, you're not a good salesman. We all know the art of selling is when who you're selling to doesn't feel like you're selling to them. That's a true salesman, right? If you start a business or startup, key thing is selling. You need to sell to investors. You need to sell to your new team members to hire them. You need to sell constantly to customers. You need to sell to government, to educational institutes, for grants, for what have you. You're constantly selling. You need to sell it to yourself too. We talk about mission and all that thing, right? If you can't do the basic selling well, I don't think you even start. We hear of all these unicorn founders, how charismatic, we watch them on YouTube, that kind of thing, right? Even supposedly introverted nerds, right? When they talk, when you talk very simply, maybe you talk very technical, but you are in awe of that subject matter. And that is the way they sell to their audience, right? So I think this selling is really important. If you're not good at it, I would suggest you start a founder, go and hone your skills there first before you set up your company.
I suppose you need to be multidisciplinary, right? In that regard, you have to be jack of and master of quite a number of aspects of what you're doing, isn't it? Right? Can
I just add one point on the market question, because we explore markets through the lens of countries, which is a very important lens, as both KR and Joel articulated. But I think there's also the question of sectors. Like, are there better sectors, better industries to enter? And which is a very, very common question that I get from aspiring entrepreneurs. Let's take an example. Right now, AI. Like probably 90% or 95% of the pitches I'm hearing are, we want to do something in AI. So very, very crowded. So of course, AI is applicable across multiple industries, but we see the trend. And I think in this industry selection or market selection, there's also this tension that founders need to navigate between, on one hand, going into the hot industry, where they feel that raising money is going to be easier, where the media are going to be more interested in the stories, versus going into the maybe not so popular industries, but where competition is probably going to be less intense. There's going to be less money being thrown at non-profitable companies that you have to compete with. So there's really that tension that founders need to carefully think about, because going for the hot sector, as in the popular sector, may not always be the safe or the best risk-adjusted decision. I really think it's important when you pick an industry to pick one where you have, as a founder, an unfair advantage, either in the form of deep expertise to begin with, like Joel in automotive for 20 plus years or 30 years now, or an industry where you have particular connections, but don't necessarily default to the hot industry because this is the industry that everyone is talking about. I think that's one pitfall that founders need to be mindful of.
Okay, no, fair point. Yeah, when you are sort of working with startups and trying to get them up and running, maybe just some advice from all of you, since you've been in that space, for those who are aspiring to have a startup or in the process of doing a startup. Do you have a checklist which we could very quickly put together here to help them, see which are the boxes they need to tick?
My checklist is, number one, problem, which I discussed a bit earlier. Have you identified an unsolved problem for a specific user segment? And that's a high bar. Number two, it's momentum. The name of the game, startups are very hard. At the beginning, people have a lot of energy, but then over time, because building a successful solution can take many, many years, that initial energy can fade a little bit. And the one thing that trumps this is momentum. So if you're able to build momentum, small wins that next week is going to be better than this week over week, you're getting growth. I think for me, that's the second thing I'm looking for. And then the third thing, which I tell them when it comes to funding, is don't try to raise money too early, because I think I see many early founders putting too much energy in trying to raise money, as opposed to getting market validation on the problem and their solution. And I think if you're able to get something off the ground, and if you're able to build momentum, the money will follow. I've never seen a project that had user traction and where the founder was never not able to raise the money that he or she needed to take this project further.
I have two things I want to talk about. I want to say which are really important before you do your startup. Number one is value. Now, I'm not just talking about monetary value. I'm talking about human value. See, in this world of startups and business and all that, right? Everybody talks about unicorn valuation. No. Don't focus on all those things, right? Don't focus on clicks, followers, what have you. Focus on human value. It doesn't matter whether you are in a climate change startup, whether you're an AI, all of these lead down to one thing. Are you creating real human value to somebody? One person, 1,000 person, 1 million person. You know, whether you're doing Gmail or you're doing WeChat, whatever, or electric vehicle, right? These companies become so big and powerful because they created true human value that nobody else can compete or even replicate. So I would recommend that, you know, talk to 10 people you really respect in your life, across different age group, and say, I got this idea. Do you think that this really creates good human value for a group of people potentially? You know, and because when you do value, it's relative. Because you say, I want to make curry puff, but no, sorry. Old Chunky makes better curry puff than you. So what makes you think you create more better value than Old Chunky making curry puffs, right? So you get to test all this out. So focus on this real true value. Even not-for-profit, right? You're creating really good human value on not-for-profit level. You created something very powerful and meaningful, and that will lead you somewhere. The next thing I want to talk about is before you go ahead, you really need to ask yourself this question. And I think everybody here understands great. Right? Running a startup, pushing it through is very, very painful. It is an exercise in suffering. Okay, I'm not going to mince my words. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Starting a company, however small, however big your dreams or whatever, it's going to mean a lot of suffering. Every single step of the way. Even when you think you reach IPO, you also are still suffering. Even when you reach a level like Jensen Huang, he is also still suffering. Okay? They signed up for it, but they believe so much, they're so passionate about it, that the good days overcome all the suffering. It is still powerful and meaningful enough. Are you ready to suffer for your goal, for your mission, for your objectives? If your answer is yes, test it out again, go through small little steps, you know, a little bit of trials and tribulations, even like for example, fundraising. If you can't get through those basic, if you can't get through 10 rejections without feeling downtrodden and depressed, then you really need to rethink whether you're ready for it.
I'm in full agreement with Joel and Julien and what they've said. And to me, the most important thing is the management team. Whether they are highly motivated, driven, and committed, and have that kind of drive to make it happen. That's key. And sometimes the technology is a secondary factor, because if the team is good, we rather invest in the team. And if the technology doesn't work out, move into another technology using that team, attitude-wise and so on. And then the next thing that's very key to me is the technology scalable on a global scale? You may start small in Singapore or any other country, and can it get traction and move on? That's very key. Get the numbers coming in terms of revenue. Once you get that, it shows that the technology has efficacy, has a following, people are interested and willing to pay for it. Then fundraising becomes a lot easier, as Julien mentioned, because there is a track record. It's no more the case of eyeballs that was the case a long time ago or some time back. And now they want to see real figures. And when you have real figures and things happening, you have a basis for your operations, and there's a good chance the company will make it. Then you want to look at your sustainability, ESG, and other factors like this, because it's a good thing to have. It's the future. Young people look at that, and the VCs certainly are putting money into those kind of ventures. And what I might add is very often startups have great difficulty getting moving started, because very difficult to get the first few projects. And on that score, the last 5-10 years, the Singapore government has recognized that they have to help out. Because when you go there as a new startup, everybody says, what projects do you have? And you don't have anything, or you only have one or two, which is not very credible, you're not going to hit the road running. But what the government departments, whether it's PUB or Singtel or some of the big boys, what they do is they give you pilot projects to start with, to try out your technology. And if it works, then they scale you up to the next level and the next level, so you can get your foot in. And that way you build up a track record and credibility, both for the Singapore market, for other business, as well as going international.
So many wonderful suggestions and recommendations. I think is very useful for anybody who's thinking of entering the startup space to consider getting, just hearing all the things that you've said, very useful to have as part of the checklist, right? One of the things that, as a closer, maybe is people. When you start up, you might start up with one or two friends that you know, or people that you know, with money that from folks that you know. As you scale, that factor of being ruthless in your decision making, sometimes people are not carrying it. You need different people to come into the picture. Now, how do you decide that? I know part of it is your own character, possibly, and your own upbringing, perhaps, but how do you decide between friendship and the bonds that you've built versus the future of a business which you think will grow without the friends?
Well, I think that's a difficult question, but the chemistry must be right so you can work as a team and cohesively, and they all must be very committed. It must not be a fancy that goes away after a short while. And sometimes I find, like in marriage, if you can travel with your partner, you can find out a lot more about the partner. And after 5 days together, you realize whether you can make a life together or you can't. Same with the team, you've got to work with them and day in, day out, and see what the commitment is like and what the drive is like, and whether they can function as a team, how committed they are, and whether they are selfish or they are team players. That's very key.
I think the one way to avoid problems later down the road is to have the hard conversations up front. So especially with co-founders at the beginning, like for marriage, you need to discuss whether there should be a prenup or not. And my recommendation to every founder is that you should have a prenup, and that the prenup for a startup is called vesting schedule. So let's say you have two co-founders, and let's say you go for 50-50, which I don't recommend, but which is a very common case. There needs to be an agreement up front that if for whatever reason, one of the co-founders decides to leave in the first 12 or 24 months of the venture, the equity that this founder owns, 50%, is going to go back to the remaining founder. If you don't set up that type of vesting schedule up front, you basically make your company non-fundable later down the road, because founder divorce happens more often than we'd like to admit. And when no vesting setup has been structured, basically the company is non-manageable. And I've seen companies having to shut down because they did not have those hard conversations up front. They did not do the prenup. They did not set up a proper vesting structure, and therefore the company had to go down.
I went through a lot of these problems in my earlier startups. So in my more recent startups, what I have implemented is from day one, before you even set up the company, before you raise money, before you even hire people, I always set up a set of guiding principles. We forget, companies, Singapore, everywhere else, there's this thing called a constitution of a company. We set up certain rules that all officers, everybody in the company is supposed to abide by. We think that there's some legal jargon or what have you. And sure it is, right? Over time it's evolved into something very slick. But a startup is a fast-moving company that innovates, that evolves. But there should be some rock-solid principles that are set up in the beginning that everybody should follow. It can change, it can evolve as well, even the principles. But they must have a reason to evolve. We all know, we all understand that companies are by virtue of the fact authoritarian. Companies dictate, it's a dictatorship, right? Shareholders control it, the board controls it. One guy on top, biggest shareholder, CEO, where he controls, whatever he says goes. At the end of the day. Now you can talk about checks and balances and whatever, but to me, the real authentic successfulness of a company, success of a company is led by guiding principles that set up. by the first group of people. It can be one of the co-founders that have you, and evolve such that everybody who joins the team agrees somewhat or rather to follow these guiding sets of principles. Now, if somebody falls along wayside, and it could be keeping up pace, it doesn't matter whether you're CEO or you are the janitor. If you can't keep up based on these principles, then it's not me firing you, it's not me asking you to leave. It's because for some reason you can't keep up to what we have agreed that we should all do together. So it's not personal anymore, right? It's about the mission.
Okay, great. So mission, vision, statements, checklists. I think we've covered a fair amount of ground in this discussion on startups. Anybody out there who's looking to start up something, well, pay heed to what the gentlemen have offered as advice, and also some of the questions from the audience. Well, I'm sure we'll see many more startups coming up in the future, and maybe new principles or new ideas will emerge as a result, which would fuel this sort of discussions in future. But for now, I think it's nice to see so many things starting up, and it's great to see that spirit of invention and innovation still very much in play.